Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world of brocade, gold-trimmed everything, and enough perfume to choke a goat. Yes, we're talking about the hygiene habits of 18th century European royalty, a group of people who may have had diamonds in their closets, but not necessarily soap in their baths. Imagine silk stockings, powdered wigs, and a palace that smells like a mix of roses, cheese, and yesterday's chamber pot. And no, you probably won't survive this era, not unless you have a nose of steel and a very forgiving immune system. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. It's always fascinating to see who's drifting off with a powdered wig in mind. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You open your eyes to gilded ceilings and candlelit hallways. Outside the palace windows, the gardens stretch endlessly into the fog. You're in Versailles, or Schönbrunn, or maybe even the Hofburg. Wherever you are, one thing's certain, everything is dazzlingly beautiful, and just a bit sour-smelling. Because here's the deal, in the 1700s, European royalty were obsessed with appearances, lace cuffs, towering wigs, jeweled slippers, but oddly enough, not so obsessed with cleanliness. Not in the way you're thinking, anyway. Hygiene didn't mean scrubbed floors and minty breath. It meant layers of fragrance, changing your shirt more often than washing your skin, and hoping no one noticed the mildew behind your ears. You trudge slowly through a corridor where the air is thick with a perfume so heavy it clings to your tongue. Nobles pass by you, their cheeks powdered white, their lips dotted with bright rouge, and their eyes lined with kohl. They look ethereal, from a distance. Get too close, and you'll detect something more earthy. A bit of unwashed reality beneath the lavender. You pass through the hall of mirrors, where crystal chandeliers sparkle above, and your shoes click on the marble. No one seems to notice the faint musk hanging in the corners. That's because it's normal. Expected. Even admired. Royals didn't bathe often, sometimes only once or twice a year. And if they did, they were cautious. Water, they believed, could open the pores and let illness in. Baths weren't cleansing, they were risky. So instead, they leaned into dry hygiene. You're handed a scented cloth, meant for rubbing down your arms and neck. There's no soap involved, just infused oils, often with rose or amber. It leaves a pleasant sheen, and a stronger scent. You dab at your wrists, mimicking the way a noblewoman might, and realize this was the standard: look clean, smell expensive, and hope no one asks questions. In the royal apartments, you see little bowls of potpourri, bunches of herbs tied with ribbon, and handkerchiefs soaked in violet essence. These weren't just for display. People pressed them to their noses while passing others. Not out of rudeness, but defense. And then there's the court perfume scene. You stop by a small cabinet filled with tiny glass bottles, each with a handwritten label: jasmine, bergamot, civet. Yes, civet, as in a musky substance secreted from a cat-like animal's glands. It was all the rage. You pick one up and sniff. It's strong. Regal, even. But definitely something you'd want to wear, not inhale too deeply. Perfume didn't just cover scent. It was believed to protect health. Physicians claimed that pleasant aromas warded off miasmas, those invisible, bad airs, thought to carry disease. So if someone passed out from the stench of the royal dining room, it wasn't the spoiled meat, it was a medical emergency. Quick, fetch the rose water. Historians still argue whether these habits were driven more by medical theory or by sheer aesthetic stubbornness. Either way, they stuck. For centuries. As you wander past silk-draped walls and glinting candelabras, you begin to understand something else. Cleanliness, in this world, wasn't about health. It was about performance. To be powdered, perfumed, and poised was to show status. It didn't matter if your socks were growing their own ecosystems, as long as your cuffs were crisp and your collar stood high. So tonight, As you lie still and let the flickering candlelight dance across your imagination, remember, behind every royal portrait was likely a smell you don't want to imagine. But don't worry, we're just getting started. You wake, or maybe you never really fell asleep, somewhere deep within a royal palace. The candle has burned low, casting long, twitching shadows across your chamber wall. The scent of rosewater still clings to your clothes. And then it hits you, you feel grimy. Not just because of yesterday's dust, but because the entire place, as grand as it is, carries the scent of people who think bathing is suspicious. Welcome to 18th century royal hygiene, where the most powerful people in Europe avoided water like it had insulted their ancestors. You shuffle toward the bath chamber, or what passes for one. There's a porcelain tub in the corner, decorative, really, more likely to be used once every few months, and only after an elaborate series of debates, diagnoses, and deep spiritual reflections. You lean over and sniff it. Dusty. Unused. A single dried lavender sprig lies at the bottom like a suggestion someone gave up on. The fear of water runs deep here. Many royals believed bathing would open the pores, making one vulnerable to disease. To be too clean was to be too exposed. Instead of washing with soap and water, they preferred what we might call dry cleaning, rubbing down with scented cloths, changing layers of linen, and misting themselves with floral waters. Louis XIV of France, for instance, is said to have bathed fewer than a handful of times in his entire adult life. And when he did, it was a formal event, attended by servants and sometimes nobles. Not exactly relaxing. More of a medical procedure than a spa day. Historians still argue whether these accounts are exaggerated, but the trend is undeniable. Full-body baths were rare, and when they happened, they were filled with precautions. You didn't sit in water willy-nilly. First, the tub had to be cleaned with vinegar and herbs. Then, the water itself would be steeped with calming additives, orange peel, mint, even wine. Just in case the bath needed to be fortified. And then came the process itself. You'd likely be half-clothed, sitting awkwardly in lukewarm water, while servants carefully dabbed at your limbs with soft cloths. Soap. Optional. Towels. Pre-warmed, of course, lest the chill undo all the good the bath had done. You sit on the edge of the tub now, listening to the faint echo of your breath in the tiled room. Even here, in the bathing chamber, there's no smell of soap. No hint of scrubbed skin. Just perfume. Always perfume. If you were a queen, things were even trickier. Bathing was not only dangerous, it was improper. Modesty demanded a screen, perhaps even a separate room for the bather and the bath itself. Water was poured delicately from pitchers, often by gloved attendants, onto linen cloths that would then be patted gently against the skin. The goal wasn't to wash. It was to refresh. Like dusting furniture with expensive mist. You step out of the chamber and return to your quarters. A footman passes with a tray, not of food, but of heated linen strips soaked in lavender vinegar. He bows, offers one with tongs, and waits while you rub it against your neck and wrists. He then collects it and vanishes. Another royal refreshment, complete. And don't even ask about hair. Full scalp washing was almost unthinkable. Wigs helped, of course, why wash what isn't real? But even under the wigs, natural hair was often braided and rarely touched with water. Dry shampoos, usually in the form of powder made from starch or even crushed bones, were liberally applied to keep things looking fresh. One famous pamphlet even warned against hair washing in winter, claiming it could cause brain fog and early death. The advice? Dust your hair. Don't drench it. You lie back on your silken bedding, a little itchy from the perfumed powder lingering in the air. Your skin feels like it's wearing a costume. There's beauty here, certainly. But no comfort. And still, they believed this was clean. This was royal. The fewer baths you took, the healthier you were, so long as you looked good and smelled better than the person next to you. So the next time you complain about stepping into a cold shower, remember, at least you're not bathing in wine, surrounded by physicians, while wondering whether your pores are about to betray you. You stretch beneath embroidered sheets, still adjusting to the sensation of being coated in rose-powdered residue instead of soap. But before you can even ponder a bath you'll never take, the knock comes, soft, deliberate. Your morning attendants have arrived. And here begins one of the most theatrical hygiene rituals of 18th century royalty, the morning toilette. Not toilet in the modern sense, but rather the elaborate, highly stylized process of becoming presentable. Think of it as a personal grooming ceremony with witnesses. You rise slowly, because haste is not fashionable. A maid carries over your day's wig, already styled and dusted. Another presents your outfit, which weighs about the same as a decent bookshelf. But before you can don any of it, there's work to be done on your face, and your scent. You begin with powder. Lots of it. White, chalky, scented like wilted violets and regret. It clings to your cheeks, temples, chin, and especially your forehead, which must remain gleaming and ghostly to convey nobility. This isn't mere vanity, it's status. Pale skin shows you don't work in the sun. Never mind that the lead in your powder may slowly poison you. You lean forward, and your servant carefully dabs rouge on your cheeks, a deep pink drawn in tight, unnatural circles. Not blended. No one's aiming for dewy flush here. They're aiming for statement. The rouge is often made from crushed cochineal beetles or mercuric sulfide. Glamorous, yes. Safe. Not even close. Historians still argue whether these beauty products were knowingly toxic, or if court society just decided elegance was worth a little organ failure. Next comes the pomade. Thick, greasy, and sweet-smelling, it's made from bear fat or sheep suet, infused with herbs. It's applied liberally to your real hair, or what little of it remains, so the wig can stick firmly to your skull like a heavy, perfumed helmet. You wince slightly as the wig is set in place. It's enormous. It's magnificent. It might be sentient. A towering mass of curled strands, ribboned puffs, and powdered elegance, designed less for beauty and more to show power. You sit tall beneath its weight. Then come the patches. Tiny velvet shapes, moons, stars, diamonds, pressed to your cheek or chin. They're not for moles or blemishes, though they might help cover them. They're code. A patch near the lip could suggest flirtation. Near the eye. Mystery. Near the corner of the mouth. Perhaps, mischief. This tiny bit of glued fabric is both decoration and whispered signal. Your face now looks porcelain and mildly haunted. Which is perfect. Next, your gloves, always perfumed, of course. You slip your hands in carefully. The leather is soft, lined with silk, and infused with orange blossom and musk. These gloves are worn not just to smell pleasant, but to protect you from others. In a world where people still believed in miasmas and contagious vapors, your accessories had to do double duty, fashion and filtration. You stand. A footman bows and hands you a nosegay, a tiny bundle of herbs and flowers wrapped in lace. It's not just decorative. It's your mobile air freshener. If someone nearby smells particularly 18th century, you lift it to your nose. Gently. Discreetly. Like a noble resisting a feint. As you head toward the salon, the hallway echoes with the quiet shuffling of dozens of servants preparing others just like you. Everyone's being powdered, patched, spritzed, pinned. Rooms smell like a florist shop collided with a taxidermy studio. And here's the kicker, none of this is private. At Versailles, the king's morning toilette was a public ritual. Nobles were granted the honor of watching him wake, get dressed, and have his face cleaned with rosewater-soaked cloths. The more important you were, the closer to the bed you got. Talk about awkward networking. You pause to check your reflection in a tarnished mirror framed with gold. Your face is pale, your lips are red, your hair reaches for the ceiling. You don't look clean. But you look prepared. And in this world, that's what matters. So as you step into the day, perfumed and polished, remember, you may not have bathed, but your toilette has transformed you. You're an artwork now. A walking portrait. Just, don't touch your face. You walk carefully now, the floor beneath you groaning with the weight of marble and expectation. Your heeled shoes click softly with each step, echoing down the corridor. But something begins to distract you. Not the smell, you're used to that by now. It's something more primal. A pressure. A reminder that despite all the powdered wigs and silk, you are, unfortunately, human. And so, the question arises, where does a royal go to relieve themselves? The short answer. Anywhere. Despite the grandeur of 18th century European palaces, plumbing was more idea than reality. Bathrooms, as we know them, were rare, if not completely absent. And toilets? Let's just say they weren't reserved for private moments in tiled sanctuaries. You round a corner and see a chair in an alcove. Upholstered. Mahogany legs. Velvet cushion. Fancy, really. Except, it has a hole in the middle. Yes, it's a commode chair, essentially a portable toilet for nobles who didn't have time to find an actual one, or who simply preferred to stay in the social loop while handling their business. The chamber pot is tucked neatly beneath. This wasn't strange. In fact, relieving oneself was often semi-public. It wasn't uncommon for nobles to excuse themselves mid-conversation and do their business behind a folding screen, or even discreetly in the fireplace nook if one was handy. Historians still argue whether this behavior was driven by practicality, laziness, or sheer obliviousness to smell, but in any case, the royal elite weren't exactly discreet. You pass by another window seat and notice a gentleman calmly adjusting his cravat while a servant retrieves a chamber pot from beneath the cushion. No one bats an eye. Cleanliness wasn't the priority, continuity was. The flow of court life couldn't be disrupted by something as trivial as bodily functions. Even the palace gardens weren't safe. If you were strolling in the greenery and nature called, well, there were convenience bushes, unofficially acknowledged spots for quick relief. One account from Versailles describes the air in the gardens as delicate and floral, with the occasional sharp punctuation of something less noble. Inside the palace, actual chamber pots were everywhere. Beneath chairs. In closets. Hidden in decorative cabinets. Some were porcelain, beautifully painted with flowers or even family crests. Others were silver. Because if you're going to do something unpleasant, might as well do it in style. You peer into a side room now and spot a footman carrying a covered pot down a servant's corridor. He holds it at arm's length, wearing gloves and a distinctly distant expression. His job? The groom of the stool, an official title in some courts. Especially in England. This person didn't just empty royal pots, they often helped the monarch during the act. Yes, you heard that right. Helping. Directly. But the job came with perks. It was intimate. Trusted. And being near the king during such vulnerable moments meant hearing secrets, political ones. Power was everywhere, even in porcelain. Of course, not all royalty treated their waste with such ceremony. Some avoided the issue entirely. Marie Antoinette is said to have refused to use chamber pots during formal events, opting instead to hold it in for hours. Others, like Frederick the Great of Prussia, preferred simple privy boxes and military discipline, efficient, impersonal, and preferably in solitude. Still, palace corridors often reeked faintly of humanity. Especially during summer. Curtains soaked up smells. Carpets did their part. And the lack of windows in some halls created a kind of aromatic permanence. And if all of this feels shocking, remember, these were people who believed bathing was dangerous, but relieving themselves in a room full of courtiers was perfectly fine. Etiquette was never about logic, it was about layers. Literal and metaphorical. You retreat now, nose slightly wrinkled, to your own quarters. A perfumed cloth is offered. You press it to your face. Lavender. Better. So next time you marvel at the elegance of royal portraits, the lace, the poise, the proud tilt of the chin, just remember that 5 minutes before that painting was started, the subject might have been using a golden chamber pot beside a fireplace while someone took notes. Sleep tight. You lie back in bed, blinking up at the high ceiling with its painted cherubs and gilded trim. A soft rustle at the door signals the arrival of another servant, this one carrying a small metal container, covered in embroidered cloth. You already know what's inside. It's not tea. It's not cakes. It's the royal chamber pot, discreetly retrieved for cleaning. Because behind every perfumed noble was a servant tasked with dealing with the realities they preferred not to acknowledge. You sit up slowly, stretching your arms. It's hard to be fully restful when your bodily functions are part of a carefully scheduled performance. If you were royalty in the 18th century, you didn't handle your own business, you had help. A lot of help. Meet the chamber pot shufflers. Officially known as valets, maids, or in some courts, more glamorously titled positions like groom of the stool or lady of the bedchamber. These were not casual roles. They required discretion, timing, and, let's be honest, a strong stomach. You glance toward the polished mahogany commode near your bed. It looks more like a writing desk than a toilet. But beneath its hinged seat lies a ceramic bowl, hand-painted and lightly perfumed with rosewater. Some were even scented with herbs like mint or thyme before use, to create an illusion of freshness. Once full, it would be promptly whisked away, ideally through servant corridors, but often not discreetly enough. One court diary even describes a noblewoman hosting guests while a chamber pot was changed behind a screen just feet away. The guests simply turned their heads, sipped wine, and continued discussing embroidery. Historians still argue whether such openness was due to desensitization or simple resignation. Either way, privacy was more concept than practice. And if you think this was a quiet process, think again. Some court households had so many chamber pots in circulation that entire staff rosters were devoted solely to their management. You'd need someone to retrieve them, another to clean them, and yet another to restock herbs, vinegar, rinse water, or cloth covers. You get up and wander into the corridor. A faint odor lingers in the corners. You pass a young servant with a wooden rack loaded with multiple lidded pots. He nods politely and keeps moving. His hands are gloved. His pace brisk. His dignity, hanging on by a thread. The act of emptying these pots varied by rank. The king's waste. Carried immediately and ceremonially through back passages to a specially designated disposal chute. A duchess's pot. Emptied by her chambermaid, rinsed with scented water, and returned promptly. A lesser noble. Well, their pot might wait until morning. Or longer. One servant's manual from the time outlined ideal cleaning steps: rinse with wine vinegar, scrub with dried herbs, and, if you really cared, expose the pot to fresh air and sun for at least 1 hour. But of course, many skipped steps. Especially during busy seasons like banquets or balls. The result? Let's just say Versailles wasn't known for its freshness, despite all the flowers. You turn into a smaller hallway now, servant space. The air changes. It's busier, brisker, less concerned with pretense. Here, you see the reality behind the rituals: maids carrying linen soiled from overnight accidents, valets discussing pot rotations in hushed tones, and younger pages learning the ropes of pot duty with visible reluctance. One footman sighs and mutters, "The Countess has added cinnamon again." You assume this is a scenting tactic, not a diet issue. You head back to your room, chuckling quietly. For all the silks and titles, 18th century royalty were still just people, with bladders, bowels, and the occasional embarrassing moment. There's something oddly comforting about that. So tonight, as you lie back down, surrounded by perfumed linen and flickering candlelight, remember, there's always a team, quiet, efficient, and underappreciated, keeping the illusion of grace alive, one chamber pot at a time. And if your dreams tonight feature a footman balancing a silver pot on a velvet tray, well, you've earned that. You wake in the same bed, but something's off. Not the sheets, they're as stiff and fragrant as ever. It's your scalp. It itches. Not a gentle tingle, but the persistent whisper of something alive and curious. You reach up slowly, fingers brushing the powdered mound atop your head. Ah yes. The wig. Today, it's less a hairstyle and more a wildlife preserve. In the 18th century royal court, fashion wasn't just about elegance. It was about spectacle. And nothing said power like a towering, perfumed, ribboned wig that added 6 inches to your height and doubled as a fire hazard. Wigs were elaborate, time-consuming, and, let's be honest, rarely washed. Which made them a perfect home for all sorts of tiny visitors. You ease yourself out of bed and over to the vanity. A brush, thick with old pomade and starch, sits on a silver tray. You pick it up and run it gently through a loose hairpiece. A puff of powder rises into the air, filling your lungs with a scent somewhere between old soap and faded rosemary. Historians still argue whether royalty knew how infested their wigs were, or if they chose not to care. But lice, fleas, and other vermin were common in even the grandest coifs. And because wigs were rarely cleaned properly, the little critters set up shop and stayed a while. You sit in front of the mirror as a maid arrives with a fresh powdered wig. She carefully lifts the old one, revealing a skullcap beneath. It's not ideal. Damp, sticky, and slightly crawling. You resist the urge to scratch. Instead, you smile faintly and brace for the new wig, slathered with bare fat pomade and coated in fine starch. This one's decorated with tiny artificial flowers and, inexplicably, a small porcelain dove. Fashion was rarely subtle at court. And this isn't just a woman's game. Royal men wore wigs, too, white, curled, and voluminous. Powder was mandatory, and if your hair didn't leave a fine white dust on your collar, you weren't doing it right. But all that powder? Made from flour or chalk, and applied daily, it created buildup so thick that some wigs could quite literally stand on their own after weeks of wear. One fringe report even tells of a noblewoman's wig that began to emit faint squeaks, later traced to a family of mice nesting within the curls. Whether apocryphal or not, it certainly paints a picture. You step into your dressing gown and move to the window. The gardens below are full of similarly coiffed nobles, each one carrying their own powdery crown. Wigs weren't just fashion. They were armor. They masked baldness, age, and hygiene issues in one glorious puff. And here's the thing, taking care of your wig was less about cleaning it, and more about refreshing it. If it smelled bad, no problem. Just sprinkle in some violet or jasmine powder. If it drooped, heat it gently over a brazier to restore shape. If it itched, apply a bit more pomade to calm the scalp, which, of course, made the wig even heavier and more appealing to lice. Some nobles tried to be clever. They kept wig stands lined with lavender or cloves. Others wore silk wig liners soaked in vinegar to ward off pests. But mostly, they just accepted the scratching as part of life. You weren't truly noble unless you were itching under your powdered perfection. You recall a diary entry from a Bavarian countess, who admitted to removing her wig only once every 3 weeks, during which she'd scrape the interior with a bread knife and air it in the breeze. Whether that solved anything is debatable. But it was her version of dry cleaning. You return to your mirror, staring at your reflection. The wig sits tall and proud, powdered just so, and fluttering ever so slightly as a breeze sneaks in through the curtains. A small insect escapes from the curls and makes its way toward the candle. You pretend not to notice. Because here in the court, appearance is everything. And what's a few pests compared to glory? So tonight, if your scalp tingles or your dreams involve tiny powdered rodents hosting a tea party atop your head, just smile. You're in good company. You catch yourself mid-yawn, your wig finally settling into place like a sleepy helmet. The scent of rose powder still clings to your sleeves, but under it, something deeper, muskier, almost spicy. Not unpleasant, exactly, just overwhelming. And persistent. Like it's clinging to the back of your throat. You reach for your nosegay, a tight little bundle of herbs and blossoms, and inhale gently. There it is again, perfume. Not just for elegance, but for survival. In the rarefied air of 18th century royal life, perfume wasn't luxury, it was armor. Against what, you ask? Odor, yes. But also disease. The miasma theory, the belief that foul air caused illness, ruled every corridor, closet, and court physician's recommendation. So, masking stink wasn't just social, it was medical. You shuffle down the corridor past the Queen's withdrawing room. A maid walks by carrying a tray of what looks like scented waxes and crystal bottles. One topaz vial contains Hungary water, a strong rosemary-based spirit thought to be both a cologne and a curative. She nods to you politely, the air shimmering behind her like a perfumed comet. You reach the antechamber, where a row of perfume fountains burble faintly. Yes, fountains. Like tiny indoor waterfalls, but instead of water, they cascade floral essences. Rose. Orange blossom. Bergamot. You dip your fingers into one, as instructed, and dab behind your ears. Another servant fans you with a ribboned wand soaked in violet water. It's soothing, in a way. Distracting, at least, from the less charming scents wafting through the building. You notice a curtain billowing slightly and behind it, a hastily abandoned chamber pot. Lavender sachets hang nearby, trying their best. Perfume was everywhere, soaked into gloves, stitched into handkerchiefs, dabbed on corsets, and even painted onto fans. One popular accessory. The vinaigrette, tiny lockets with vinegar-soaked sponges and herbs tucked inside. Nobles carried them on chains and sniffed them constantly to guard the senses. Historians still argue whether this worked as intended or just kept people politely distracted, but in any case, they swore by it. One French duke claimed his rose oil handkerchief saved him from the pox after sharing a carriage with a coughing ambassador. Correlation, causation, or placebo? You decide. You continue through the royal library, where the books smell faintly of tobacco, parchment, and pomander oil. Even the furniture is perfumed, sandalwood polish on chair legs, citrus rubbed into the arms of settees, clove buds sewn into tassels. The very walls seem scented. And it wasn't only about masking human scent. Royalty believed that good smells were signs of virtue, while foul ones hinted at moral decay. If you stank, clearly something was wrong with your soul, or worse, your breeding. You walk past a caged canary singing in the corner, its perch dusted with dried lavender. Even the birds are expected to live fragrant lives. One footman, barely in his teens, walks by with gloves tucked under his arm. They glisten faintly, they've been soaked in ambergris. Yes, that ambergris, the waxy substance harvested from the digestive tracts of sperm whales. Pricey, powerful, and incredibly potent. You catch a whiff as he passes and feel your eyes water slightly. Nobility, it seems, is not for the weak-nosed. And perfume wasn't just defensive. It was status. A unique scent meant individuality, wealth, exclusivity. Perfumers at court became household names, concocting blends so complex that only one person might wear them. One duchess boasted a perfume made from 15 ingredients, including musk, lemon zest, and crushed pearls, yes, literal pearls. For the glow, supposedly. You return to your chamber and sit on the chaise. The candle flickers. The air is thick. You fan yourself gently, knowing that your fan isn't just cooling you, it's perfuming the space. Perfumed fans were dipped in oils and dried repeatedly, creating layers of scent that lingered with every movement. Of course, it wasn't all roses. Some perfumes, especially civet or castoreum, came from animal glands and had divisive profiles. One 18th century poet described a noblewoman's presence as a garden overrun with secrets and goats. Still, you breathe in. The complexity is strangely hypnotic. It smells like history. Like desire wrapped in dust. Like trying too hard but believing deeply. So tonight, as your own room grows quiet, and your breath slows, imagine lying beneath heavy quilts, your skin faintly sticky with scented oils, your pillowcase pressed with orange blossom and something unplaceable. Maybe civet. Maybe old velvet. And let your dreams drift through corridors of scent, where perfume isn't vanity, it's survival. You've barely closed your eyes when a footman appears with another tray. This one, oddly shaped, seems more ornamental than functional. Nestled among the velvet folds lies a pair of white gloves, delicate, embroidered, and very clearly, scented. Strongly. You pick one up, instinctively bringing it to your nose. It's a bouquet of violet and lemon peel, with something richer underneath, amber, maybe, or a whisper of musk. Not just pleasant. Purposeful. Because in the 18th century royal world, scented gloves weren't just accessories. They were politics. They were health aids. And occasionally, they were murder weapons. You slip the gloves on slowly. The lining is soft, lined with silk and possibly beeswax, meant to retain the perfume and release it gradually throughout the day. You flex your fingers. It's like breathing through your hands. But elegant. Perfumed gloves had long been popular in royal circles, especially in France, where entire guilds were devoted to the art of glove-making and scent infusion. The process involved soaking leather in mixtures of essential oils, tinctures, and even animal fats, letting it absorb fragrance before being shaped, stitched, and trimmed to perfection. And they weren't just for show. These gloves were believed to protect the wearer from disease. If your hands passed through air thick with contagion, the scent barrier was supposed to neutralize the bad vapors. You weren't touching the world, you were filtering it, one perfumed gesture at a time. You wander down a hallway now, passing portraits of nobles frozen in time. Nearly everyone wears gloves, sometimes mid-handshake, sometimes pressed delicately to the chest, sometimes held flirtatiously near the chin. It's all calculated. Because gloves didn't just protect, they communicated. A gloved touch was an invitation. A gloved slap. Well, we all know what that meant. But then comes the twist. You enter the Queen's salon, where gossip hangs heavier than the perfume. A whisper reaches your ear, someone received a pair of gloves, anonymously. A lovely gift. Until they wore them, and collapsed. A case of poisoned gloves. Yes, this was a real concern. Perfume, after all, was made with alcohol, oils, tinctures, perfect carriers for toxins. Arsenic, belladonna, cyanide, any could be introduced through a strong enough perfume blend. And since gloves warmed against the skin, the absorption was all too efficient. Historians still debate how widespread this practice actually was. Some say it's myth, exaggerated by romantic fiction and political paranoia. Others insist it happened more than people dared admit. Either way, the idea was powerful enough to linger, enough that courtiers sometimes refused gifts of scented items unless they came from a trusted hand. You pause near a chaise longue, the scent from your gloves now merging with the ever-present floral fog of the room. A courtier fans herself beside you, her own gloves trimmed with lace and tiny mother-of-pearl buttons. She sees your unease and smiles. Citrus, she says simply, holding her palm out. It makes everything safer. Some nobles even believed that lemon-scented gloves were especially purifying, that the acids helped ward off more than just odor. They could protect your virtue. Or at least your peace of mind. Gloves were scented according to season, fashion, and even mood. In spring, rose and iris. In winter, clove, cinnamon, and cedar. Some royal favorites included neroli, from orange blossoms, myrtle, and even tobacco flower, blended so masterfully that the scent would unfold slowly, like a court intrigue. You return to your chamber now, removing the gloves and laying them gently across the back of a chair. The scent clings to your fingers. Not unpleasant. Not alarming. Just, ever-present. A faint reminder that in this world, your hands weren't just appendages. They were statements. Shields. And, occasionally, weapons. So tonight, if you dream of soft leather, whispered threats, or passing a scented hand across someone's cheek with carefully measured grace, know that you're not alone. You're simply playing by royal rules. You're lounging now, one gloved hand resting lazily across your lap, when you notice it, a dull ache just behind your jaw. A tiny, throbbing reminder that royalty, for all its perfume and polish, is not immune to the very human misery of tooth trouble. And in the 18th century court, dental care was, well, let's call it creative. You shuffle over to the mirrored dressing table and lean in. Your lips part slowly, revealing a mouth powdered with sugar and secrets. Your teeth, if you're lucky, are still mostly intact. If you're very lucky, they're not blackened or loose. But odds are, at least one is aching, and your breath, let's just say, is more Versailles than vanilla. Here's the strange truth, sugar was both luxury and enemy. Royalty consumed it constantly, in tea, in pastries, in decorative candied fruits. The sheer abundance of sugar at court made it a symbol of status. But the mouth paid the price. Toothbrushes existed, technically. You pick one up now, a slim bone handle with boar bristles that are already splayed in wild directions. The paste? Often made from ground pumice, charcoal, and, wait for it, honey. So yes, you're cleaning your teeth with sweetened sandpaper. Your gums twinge at the thought. You press your finger to one of your molars. Tender. Not unexpected. Toothaches were part of noble life, as inevitable as gossip or gout. Queen Elizabeth had famously blackened teeth in the prior century, and by the 1700s, it hadn't gotten much better. If your tooth pain worsened, there were options. Not good ones, but options. First, there was the herbal rinse. You'd swish warm wine laced with mint, vinegar, or even crushed cloves. Not bad. Temporary. Then came the poultices, herbs mashed with brandy and packed directly into the aching tooth. Slightly better than nothing. But eventually, the inevitable arrived. The royal dentist. You sit back in your chair as the memory returns. A man with a fine mustache and very questionable tools, pliers, hooks, and something that looked alarmingly like a corkscrew. No anesthesia. No numbing gel. Just a firm grip, a fast hand, and maybe a strong glass of something beforehand. And yet, having bad teeth was so common that nobles often just ignored it. They perfected the art of smiling with their mouths closed. Fans weren't just for flirting, they were a polite way to hide a grimace or cover a breath that could start a revolution. Some nobles turned to dental fashion. Tooth blackening became briefly trendy, especially in France, where it was believed that showing your decay proudly proved you were rich enough to afford all that sugar. A kind of sweet-fueled badge of honor. Historians still argue whether this was truly widespread or just satirical gossip gone viral. You wander through the royal drawing room now and spot a display case. Inside, a set of porcelain teeth. Not a sculpture, an actual denture, likely once worn by a duchess. Early dentures were made from ivory, animal bone, or even human teeth bought from the poor. They rarely fit, were never comfortable, and often rattled alarmingly when the wearer laughed. You shiver slightly. Back in your room, you rinse your mouth with rosewater. It's soothing, mildly antiseptic, and utterly ineffective against cavities. But in the absence of floss and fluoride, it's all you've got. You sit quietly, mouth closed, breathing through your nose. A soft knock at the door. A servant appears with a fresh bundle of mint tied in silk ribbon. You nod and press the bundle against your cheek. The ache eases. Slightly. Dental health wasn't about prevention. It was about endurance. Tolerating discomfort, masking scent, and appearing unbothered, like everything else in royal life. So tonight, as your jaw tenses slightly and your dreams lean suspiciously toward dentists with candlelit pliers, remind yourself, you're royal. You may not sleep with minty breath, but you'll sleep with dignity. Just, try not to grind your teeth. The ache behind your jaw has faded to a dull hum, softened by the mint and perhaps the steady ticking of the ornate wall clock. You shift in your seat and glance at the linens draped over the edge of the bed. Crisp. Embroidered. Slightly yellowed at the seams. And that's when it hits you, when was the last time anything in this palace was properly washed? Because in the world of 18th century royalty, laundry was less about cleanliness and more about optics. Your undergarments might go unchanged for days. Your bed linens. Weeks. Maybe longer. And those towering gowns and embroidered jackets? Rarely washed. In fact, cleaning them was seen as risky, a surefire way to ruin fragile fabric, delicate lace, or carefully constructed silhouettes. You rise and lift the hem of your robe. It looks immaculate. But the faint scent of body, of skin and perfume and dust, clings just beneath the surface. That's because most noble garments weren't cleaned, they were aired. You'd hang them in a breezy gallery or drape them across a chair near the window. If the weather was good, a servant might shake them out. If it wasn't, perfume and prayer. Shifts and chemises, those thin linen layers worn next to the skin, served as barriers between the body and the expensive clothing. These were the most frequently laundered items, but frequent still meant perhaps once every 2 or 3 wears. And even that depended on the season. You step into the dressing room now, where maids are folding piles of linen. They sprinkle each layer with dried lavender and tuck scented sachets between the folds. There's a pot of starch bubbling nearby, and an iron warming gently over coals. This is the royal laundry, less wash, more ritual. True washing, when it did occur, was a laborious process. Linen was boiled in cauldrons, scrubbed with lye or wood ash, and pounded by hand. Water was hauled in buckets, heated over fires, and poured carefully over garments that might be worth more than a servant's annual wages. Historians still argue whether royal households truly avoided washing out of delicacy or because their clothing was just too ornate to handle water. Either way, fresh was mostly a matter of presentation, not sanitation. You watch a maid hold up a noblewoman's petticoat and shake it gently. The dust dances in the morning light. It's folded, pressed with a lavender sachet, and returned to the armoire. Then there are the bed sheets. You glance back at yours, delicate embroidery, gold thread, slightly stiff. These were prized possessions, often part of a dowry, and washing them too often could lead to fraying. So instead, nobles changed parts of the bed, top linens, maybe a pillowcase, but rarely stripped the entire thing. One chambermaid once wrote of a baroness who slept upon the same sheets for a month, changing only the coverlet and scenting the pillow anew each night. Romantic? Perhaps. Hygienic? Let's not ask. In summer, it got worse. Sweat, perfumes, body oils, all mingled in a warm, wool-draped environment. The solution? More powder. More flowers. More frequent applications of rosewater and vinegar spritzes. You recall a fringe solution you'd read about, pressing fine muslin sheets soaked in lemon water between clothing layers to draw out impurities. Others sewed thin waxed paper into gowns to shield the outer fabric from body contact. Was it effective? Debatable. Was it complicated? Always. And here's the twist, some nobles actually preferred a certain lived-in smell. It was, to them, authentic. Intimate. A trace of humanity beneath the lace. One French count reportedly refused fresh clothes if they smelled too crisp, claiming it made him feel like a mannequin. You return to your seat, smoothing your robe. The fabric is still warm from your skin, and there's a faint crease at the elbow. In the mirror, you look perfectly presentable. Polished. Regal. No one would know that your chemise is on day 3. So tonight, as you slide between sheets that have only heard of soap, and you wrap yourself in the softness of carefully perfumed neglect, remember, royalty wasn't about being clean. It was about appearing unbothered. And if your dreams tonight feature boiling cauldrons of lavender-laced laundry, or a corset that politely refuses to be washed, just smile. You're sleeping like a true noble. You're sitting up right now, half-dressed and fully powdered, when there's another knock at the door. But this time, it's not a servant. It's a chamberlain. He bows deeply and announces that it is time for the king's toilette public, the royal grooming ritual, performed with all the intimacy of a live theater production. You follow him through the corridors of the palace, feet muffled by thick rugs, past courtiers already lined up in the salon. They're not here to eat. Not to pray. They're here to watch the king comb his hair. Yes, this was real. At the height of 18th century court life, royal grooming was a public event. The morning toilette was less about hygiene, more about spectacle. Nobles were invited to attend, not out of curiosity, but obligation. If you were granted the privilege of watching the monarch shave or slip into his breeches, it meant you had favor. If you weren't invited, well, better check your standing. You enter the royal bedchamber. It's enormous, pillars, chandeliers, murals of cherubs, but the main attraction is at the center, the king, sitting in a brocade dressing robe, surrounded by servants holding combs, wash basins, and embroidered towels. He looks bored. Maybe a little hungover. But regal, always. A valet steps forward and offers a cloth soaked in orange flower water. The king dabs his face. Another servant brings over a comb, silver, delicately engraved. The king's wig is still off. His real hair, powdered and thinning, is given a quick once-over before being covered again. This entire performance takes over an hour. The king doesn't lift a finger. Every movement, trimming a nail, applying balm to the lips, even adjusting the position of a stocking, is done for him. Slowly. With ritual. You stand among other courtiers, pretending not to notice that the king has just yawned while someone else trims his ear hair. Everyone murmurs appreciatively, as if watching a ballet. This isn't about function, it's about proximity. Being seen here, even for a moment, could win you a position, a favor, a marriage proposal. Historians still argue whether this tradition was born from genuine belief in ceremony or a clever political strategy. Likely both. Louis XIV, for instance, structured his entire morning around who could enter the bedchamber at which phase of the grooming. It was court hierarchy, etched in Cologne. The queen's toilette was no less elaborate. Hers involved silk screens, scented gloves, and an entire audience of noblewomen, some chatting, some curtsying, all pretending not to watch too closely as she had her hair curled and her corset adjusted. You imagine yourself in her place, being laced into a bodice while someone reads aloud the court calendar, another powders your décolletage, and a third hands you a scented handkerchief embroidered with tiny violets. And here's the twist, while this all looked graceful, most of it was done over bodies that hadn't truly bathed. The royal toilette may have involved rosewater, clean linens, and 12-foot wigs, but beneath it all was yesterday's skin. Maybe last week's. Once the king is dressed, lace cuffs, embroidered coat, gleaming shoes, he rises. Everyone bows. You bow. He nods once, then moves on. The room begins to buzz. Courtiers whisper, trade smiles, subtly rearrange themselves according to who stood closest. You're ushered out gently by a footman and return to your own quarters. It's hard not to smile. You didn't do anything, but being present at the toilette means everything. You were part of the performance. Part of the illusion. You glance at your own mirror. Your hair's a little flat. Your hands slightly sticky from all the scented powder. But no matter. You're noble. Your appearance is your proof. So tonight, as you close your eyes and hear faint echoes of polite applause after a particularly impressive wig attachment, let yourself imagine the quiet power of being groomed like a monarch, while the world watched. Just don't forget to bow. You've returned to your quarters, your own toilette complete, and your reflection, as powdered and embroidered as ever, smiling back with careful restraint. But as you sit, taking in the room's perfumed stillness, a strange noise outside your window catches your attention. Whoosh, thump. You stand and part the curtains, peering down into the courtyard. A small commotion, a footman is waving a long-handled broom at pigeons. One flaps away in panic. Another, well, it's twitching, mid-faint, having flown directly into a lady's hairpiece. Ah, yes. The dangers of 18th-century hygiene rituals were not confined to smells or medical theories, they could be downright hazardous. You step away from the window, laughing softly, and sit once again by the fire. You remember now, that wasn't just any hairstyle. That was a poofed coiffure, 3 feet high, stiff with flour, pomade, wire, and powdered starch. The pigeon? Innocent. The hairstyle? A siege tower. You run a hand over your own wig, which today is modest by comparison. Still, it holds its shape with a terrifying permanence. It feels light as a feather but burns with the weight of animal fat and flammable powder. And that's the real risk. One of the lesser discussed facts about royal hygiene was the combustibility of it all. Wigs and hair powder were highly flammable. Fireplaces, candelabras, smoking pipes, it was a literal tinderbox of elegance. Historians still debate the true number of accidents caused by wigs catching fire, but stories abound. One duchess at a winter ball turned too quickly near a sconce and had to be doused with wine by a quick-thinking marquis. Another account tells of a wig that smoldered for minutes before the wearer noticed, having mistaken the warmth for admiration. Then came the pigeon panic. In gardens and courtyards, large wigs, especially those adorned with birdseed-laced pomade or decorative faux nests, yes, nests, drew avian attention. It was fashionable at one point to embed miniature fruit or flowers into one's hair, creating what was essentially a snack bar for local wildlife. An attempted aesthetic, yes. An unintended buffet, also yes. You chuckle now, remembering the French court's brief but chaotic flirtation with pastoral hair, where ladies sculpted entire tableaus on their heads, ships, gardens, even spinning wheels, all wired, waxed, and powdered into architectural nightmares. One particularly ambitious duchess embedded a working clock in her hair. It lasted 3 hours before collapsing mid-curtsy. And the powder itself? Applied liberally with large bellows or handheld puffs, it covered not only wigs but the furniture, the floor, and anyone standing too close. By the end of a long toilette, the air shimmered with a fine white mist. One courtier described it as breathing bread. The residue clung to curtains, clotted in nostrils, and settled in teacups. It was everywhere. Servants had to sweep powder off furniture daily. And in some palaces, windows were thrown open just to dispel the wig fog before important visits. Some royals began applying lemon peel or vinegar-soaked cloths under their wigs in hopes of fireproofing them, a fringe method at best. And still, they kept doing it. You lean your head back, smiling faintly at the ceiling's flickering candlelight. Because for all its absurdity, the danger was part of the charm. To walk into a room with a flamingo-sized hairstyle or a scented glove that could set off a canary. That was not inconvenience, it was glamour. So tonight, as you drift off beneath sheets that may or may not have met soap this month, try not to dream about candles, powder, or small birds nesting in your hair. And if you do, remember, you're not on fire. Yet. You wake to sunlight slanting through the tall windows, soft and golden across the floorboards. Outside, a breeze stirs the hedges of the formal garden. Inside, however, the air remains heavy, floral, yes, but unmistakably lived in. You rise, stretch, and glance toward the doorway where a maid stands waiting with a folded garment. It's rough spun linen. A plain shift. No lace, no trim. You blink, confused, this isn't yours. She curtsies and murmurs, from the village, my lady. Freshly washed. You take it, and for the first time in this palace of perfumed wigs and powdered upholstery, you catch a whiff of something different. Soap. Real soap. Welcome to the surprisingly cleaner world of the peasantry. Because while royalty bathed in rose-scented reputation and avoided tubs like they were portals to the underworld, many peasants, despite their poverty, had more practical ideas about hygiene. You pull the shift over your head. It's stiff but clean, sun-dried and warm. You can almost imagine the scene, a thatched cottage, a kettle over the fire, water boiling with ash lye and strips of old cloth. Soap was homemade, rough on the skin, but functional. And, most shockingly of all, actually used. Out in the countryside, peasants bathed in rivers, streams, and wooden tubs. Not daily, certainly. But seasonally, regularly, and often with more enthusiasm than their noble counterparts. They didn't have wigs to worry about or embroidery to protect. Just bodies to scrub, often with the help of elderberry soaps or clay-based rinses. You sit by the window and peer down into the outer courtyard, where stable boys scrub their hands in a trough, and a kitchen maid tosses dishwater into the grass. Everyone's hands are raw from lye and labor. But they're clean. Historians still argue whether peasants were cleaner than nobles on average, or simply dirtier in different ways. But it's clear that the aristocracy's version of hygiene was more aesthetic than functional. Out here, outside the silk curtain, clean meant survival. Linen shifts were washed. Feet were rinsed after a day in the fields. Hair was combed with bone picks and soaked in vinegar to kill lice. Not out of luxury, but necessity. You think of a shepherdess who might bathe in a shallow stream at sunset, letting her woolen dress float nearby while she lathered her hair with suds made from leftover bacon grease and wood ash. Not exactly glamorous, but far less flammable than a powdered wig and much more effective. Even bedding in a peasant's home, though coarse, was often sun-aired weekly, beaten with sticks, and scented with dried herbs hung from rafters. They didn't call it laundry day. They just called it life. You turn back from the window and run your fingers over your own silken bedding. It smells like violet and something slightly musty. Cleanish, yes. But not fresh. Not like this shift. One fringe travelogue tells of a nobleman who, upon staying with a farmer overnight, was stunned by the scent of the sheets. Simple cotton, he wrote, but sun-baked and pure. I slept as if under cloudless sky. He later requested that his own staff begin drying linen outdoors, only to have it vetoed by his valet, who insisted, such breezes are for laborers, sir. You can't help but smile. In many ways, peasants lived with fewer illusions. They didn't believe water was evil. They didn't think sweating was a sign of decay. They didn't wear wigs so big that birds could mistake them for real estate. They just washed when they could, and got on with it. So tonight, as you slip under noble sheets, perhaps a little envious of the peasant girl washing her feet in the river, let this truth settle in with you. Sometimes the cleanest people wear the simplest clothes. And they sleep best under the stars. You lean back in your chair now, one foot wrapped in a soft slipper, the scent of dried mint still clinging faintly to your shift. The breeze through the window is refreshing, though it carries with it the distant sound of a coughing valet and the ever-present whisper of perfume. And just when you think you've learned all the strange rituals of royal hygiene, you remember there's one more layer, one stranger, more dangerous layer still. Medicine. Because for the royals of the 18th century, cleanliness and health were intertwined in bizarre and often terrifying ways. If your skin was dull, your breath foul, or your moods melancholic, it wasn't poor hygiene, it was an imbalance. A blocked humor. A misaligned energy. And who better to fix that than your royal physician? You cross the room to the vanity, where a tray has been placed with today's gentle restoratives. A vial of bitter herbs in wine. A pot of mercury ointment for the hands. A curious tin of white lead face powder for your morning glow. All normal, apparently. Physicians of the time believed in purging the body as a form of cleansing. Bloodletting, enemas, vomiting agents, these weren't last resorts. They were part of regular upkeep. You weren't clean until you had expelled something. You open a velvet-bound book of medical notes and skim the entries. To refresh the skin, a gentle rinse with goat's milk and vinegar. Reasonable. For fetid breath, rub the tongue with burnt leather powder. Less appealing. To restore moral clarity, a brisk walk followed by inhalation of sulfur fumes. Now we're in the deep end. One widely believed cure for skin blemishes was bathing in mercury. Yes, mercury. The silvery, toxic metal was used to treat everything from rashes to tainted blood. Royals, desperate to maintain their appearance, rubbed it on their skin or inhaled its vapor. It gave a pale glow. It also caused tremors, hallucinations, and, eventually, organ failure. But it was fashionable, and fashion was always first. Historians still argue whether most royals understood the risk, or simply trusted the men with powdered wigs and bone-handled syringes who told them it was safe. You remember a particularly infamous case, King George III, whose madness may have been worsened by treatments that included arsenic, opiates, and repeated bloodletting. His physicians recorded over 200 sessions in a single year. And still, they insisted he was improving. There were also those who believed in sweat as the solution to all things. One physician invented a royal, sweating cabinet, a wooden box that enclosed the body while the head poked out the top. Inside, herbs were burned, and the noble roasted gently until soaked with perspiration. The goal? To expel toxins and lighten the spirit. The result? Fainting. Occasionally, spontaneous wig combustion. You glance toward your own chamber door, half expecting someone to roll in a box full of smoldering sage and say it's time to open your humors. But not all was chaos. Some treatments, though strange, were soothing. Warm foot baths scented with chamomile. Hair rinses made from rosemary tea. Face masks of mashed strawberries and crushed pearls. Unusual, yes, but relaxing in their own way. You lie back on a velvet chaise, letting your feet dangle slightly above the rug. Your skin tingles faintly from whatever ointment was applied earlier. Perhaps the one labeled mercurial balm. You decide not to read the ingredients again. What's clear is this: in the 18th century court, medicine wasn't a separate world from hygiene, it was hygiene. There was no line between beauty, health, and treatment. A cream might be meant to soothe a rash, lighten a freckle, or cure hysteria. Or all three. You close your eyes, the air warm and scented. Somewhere below, a physician stirs herbs into wine. A noblewoman rinses her face with lye. And someone, somewhere, is sweating in a box full of juniper smoke, wondering if they've been cured, or just very well marinated. So tonight, if your dreams include doctors with silver masks, mercury foot rubs, or a powder that promises inner peace through outer numbness, just breathe deeply. That's probably the sulfur. The night deepens, and the palace grows quieter. The endless rustle of petticoats has faded. No footmen pass your door. Even the fire in your hearth has reduced to a soft glow. You lie back now, your skin faintly powdered, your hair gently itching under the weight of a wig long since removed, your linen smelling not of soap, but of dried rose petals and something you can only describe as historic. And so we arrive at the final truth. The real secret tucked between all these perfumed gloves, pigeon-struck hairstyles, mercury ointments, and golden chamber pots. The long shadow of royal stench. Because for all their riches, the nobility of the 18th century left behind more than portraits and powdered footstools. They left behind a legacy of illusion, one that shaped how we think about beauty, cleanliness, and status even now. You sit up slightly and look around your opulent chamber. Every surface gleams with polish, every garment is trimmed with gold. But underneath it all, there's a kind of beautiful denial. The belief that covering a smell makes it disappear. That health can be sprayed on. That elegance is more important than ease. And that no one ever truly sweats if they do it in satin. The irony? Much of our modern obsession with hygiene, deodorants, scented soaps, whitening toothpastes, grew out of this royal resistance to reality. Historians still debate whether the poor washed more frequently because they were practical, or simply had fewer illusions to maintain. But the result remains: the royals scrubbed less but scented more, and left behind a reputation that's equal parts dazzling and dubious. You imagine a ballroom now, lit with 1,000 candles. Every dancer spinning in clouds of starch and sweat. Every breath taken through a perfumed handkerchief. And in the background, always, the quiet work of maids dabbing rosewater on cheeks, footmen fanning gowns to hide warmth, physicians standing by with salts and scented oils. It was theater. A play of purity. With no intermission and no soap in sight. Even today, traces remain. The idea that a person can be judged by their scent. That a certain, clean look implies moral superiority. That discomfort can be noble. That to truly impress, you must suffer quietly in a corset laced too tight, or a shoe too narrow, or a skincare routine made of powdered oyster shells. And still, despite all the oddity, the absurdity, there's something hypnotic about it. The pageantry. The commitment. The audacity of it all. You lie back now, arms stretched out, letting your breath slow. The candles burn lower. The room fades to golden blur. The court's asleep, each royal resting beneath silk and illusion. Somewhere, a maid sprinkles herbs into a chamber pot. A wig collapses quietly on a stand. A bundle of lavender droops on a windowsill. And you? You're safe. You're still. You're not wearing mercury. The palace is silent now. Even the air seems gentler, no longer heavy with perfume or rustling silk. You lie still, wrapped in quiet warmth, the shadows stretching long across the floor. Let your body sink into the softness beneath you, whether it's feather-stuffed linen or your own familiar pillow. Let your limbs grow heavier. Let the small details of the day drift from your thoughts, like perfume trailing behind a vanished figure. There's no more etiquette now. No lace to adjust. No powdered wig to balance. Just rest. Just stillness. Just the gentle hush of sleep waiting at the edge of your mind. Breathe in, and out. Long, slow. Feel the calm ease across your shoulders. Behind your eyelids, perhaps a final flicker of candlelight dances. Maybe you see a courtier curtsy. Or a powdered glove reach for a fan. Let the images dissolve. Let the weight of all that performance slip quietly away. You've made it through a world of contradiction, a world where bathing was feared, where wigs caught fire, and where linen was aired but rarely washed. And now, you return to your own world, where water is warm and soap comes in bottles, and pigeons rarely get tangled in your hair. Rest, now. Let the stillness take over. Let the silence soften everything. You're clean enough.